Barnes Noble Union Square, please give a warm welcome to #1 New York Times best-selling author Dan Brown and Waterstones Audience Development Manager Will Rycroft.
Good evening, everybody. That is a fantastic welcome. This is a really, really exciting evening for me. As you may hear from my accent, I am very much an Englishman in New York this evening. I work for Waterstones in the UK, which is very similar to Barnes Noble. I would just like to say a really big thank you to Waterstones, to Barnes Noble, to Transworld in the UK, and to Doubleday here in the US for helping us to give a truly transatlantic launch to Dan Brown's first novel in 8 years. I think that's worth another round of applause. Yeah. Quite often at events, people will say, here is an author who needs no introduction, but never has that been the case more than here. You know who Dan Brown is, but it's worth remembering there are 250 million copies of his books in print right now. 8 #1 bestsellers, and The Da Vinci Code remains one of the best-selling books of all time. Thank you. Thank you. But we're here to talk about a new book. And so, Dan, my hope this evening is that I can lead you through a conversation that will not have any spoilers for the new book.
Good luck.
I know a lot of you will have, bought your copy today. You will be delving into it. So when you open up the book, there is a map, as all the best books have. So my first question is, which city is that map of, and what part did that city play in inspiring The Secret of Secrets?
I'm really hoping the map is of Prague.
Yeah, correct.
I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens in each spot, but every point that is located on this map that is called out is important to the narrative for some reason. Something happens there, or it's referenced in some way. So if you just glance at the map as you start to read the book, you'll get a sense of just how long a day Robert Langdon is going to have in Prague.
I've been lucky enough to visit Prague. It's an incredible city, and I can see how it would provide you with inspiration. But can you tell me a little bit about what it is about that city that makes it such rich ground for you as a writer of fiction?
Sure. When I decided to write about human consciousness, which, by the way, is the reason this book took 8 years, it wasn't the smartest decision I've ever made. Human consciousness is a very difficult topic to write a thriller about. But as soon as I knew that it was going to be conscious, I said, it has to be Prague. Prague is the mystical center of Europe ever since the 1500s, when Emperor Rudolf II brought all the mystics and scryers and alchemists and Kabbalists to Prague to help him speak to the realms beyond. And it really, to this day, feels that way. People who visit Prague, especially at night and especially in the winter, say they can feel the veil between reality and mysticism is thin in Prague. So I love to use location as a character. And there is no better character for Langdon than Prague, in that it is filled with, of course, secret passageways and cathedrals and underground passageways and doors with 7 locks and things like that.
And you sort of hit on something there, which is that Prague has this incredible history, and it feels as though that history is sort of layered on top of each other. And what you do is take the reader sort of through those layers. We have to assume that that takes a lot of research. Are you the kind of author who has to be in a location to be able to really properly write about it?
I am, actually. And all of these books, I've gone to the locations that I've been writing about. And it's funny, you go partly because it's fun, but you go really to be inspired. And location as a character helps drive the narrative. And I'll never forget writing Origin. And if you've read that book, you know that there is a character that dies at Sagrada Familia in this church. That character in the original draft actually died later. But in visiting Sagrada Familia to learn a little bit more about Gaudi's tomb, I stumbled across this terrifying staircase, this spiral staircase that went up, and they took me up, and I thought, somebody's got to die here. So I actually went back and changed the narrative to make sure that my guy could die in that stairwell. And the same thing happened in Prague. I'm not going to give it away, but there were moments when I discovered something in the city and thought, wait a minute, let me take a left turn. Let me find a way narratively to get my character into this location, because the location is such a character, and the hero has to interact with that character.
And there's just one sort of narrative from Prague that I was really interested in, because when I visited, I had the same thing. I came away and I was obsessed with the story of the Golem. And that plays a little part in this book. Again, we're not going to spoil anything here, but I wondered whether you could share what it was about that story that kind of got its hooks into you as well.
Sure. Well, the Golem, I'm sure most of you know what it is. It's the Golem is a historical myth, part of Jewish tradition, and the story is that a rabbi in Prague, at a time when the Jews in Prague were being harassed, went to the banks of the Vltava River and dug up a lot of mud and created this giant monster out of clay. And using Kabbalistic magic, wrote 3 letters on this monster's forehead in clay, and the monster sprang to life. First of all, it's just incredibly fun. But deeper than that, the reason I used the Golem, the reason it really captured my attention, is that this is a book about consciousness, and as you read it, you'll realize that it talks about consciousness in a much different way than most of us think about it. And the notion of having a character that is lifeless, that you literally turn on and off by changing the letters on its forehead, is tied very, very closely to this novel. And the other reason is the Golem was built as a protector of the Jewish people. And so there's a character in the novel who thinks of themselves as a protector, and perhaps even is associated with the Golem in some way, historically or psychologically.
Just checking the spoiler counter, we're still at 0, so we've done all right.
So far,
yeah,
it was delicate.
Yeah. Everybody who is sat here right now and the people who are watching online in the UK and the US are fans of your work, and they have been waiting and waiting and waiting for this new book. Now, of course, a novel
I know the feeling.
A novel takes as long as it takes to write, but 8 years is a long time. And you've spoken a little bit about the ambition and the intricacies of this book. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what has been demanding of your time over the last 8 years?
Sure. Well, human consciousness is a very ephemeral topic. It's an ethereal topic. And really part of the challenge with writing this book was figuring out how to take something as ephemeral as consciousness, something that literally physicists and noeticists can't even decide what the definition should be, and trying to take that and turn it into a fast-paced thriller that's cemented in reality, that feels urgent, that feels relevant. And many, many days at my computer, it felt like trying to get my arms around smoke. It was just, it's sort of nebulous. That was part of the challenge. And the other part was that this really is, it's a longer book. It has more characters than I have in the past. And believe it or not, it is a tighter time frame than usual, which is, sometimes I'm lazy and I write a book that takes place in 24 hours. This one's compressed even further. And that also, you think it might make it easier, it makes it much harder. And it's just a way I like to challenge myself to keep the books really moving quickly.
I'm really pleased you've mentioned that compressed timeline, because we have the time it takes to write the book, which is a really long time, and then the time it takes you to sort of tell the story in this really compressed timeline. And I wanted to ask, I suppose, why you put that pressure on yourself? Why do you love having that compressed timeline for your hero?
Well, I feel like my job, above all, is to entertain, and part of that is to respect the reader's intelligence and respect the reader's time. And I put in these books only what you need to know, and believe me, there's some great material that I wanted to put in that just ends up on the floor, because if it doesn't serve the plot, then it doesn't serve the reader. It may be interesting, it may be beautiful, it may be funny, but if it really isn't promoting the plot, then it has to come out. And my editor and I have had many, many moments of saying, well, that's too bad. We'll just keep these pages in a lock safe, and maybe someday we'll share them.
And as you say, you're talking about some really, really big topics here, the idea of human consciousness and what that is and how it works. And is there an element of having, I suppose, to do all the research and then to present it in a way to readers which makes sense, but also so that it makes sense immediately, so that you only need to read that once and you understand what you were trying to say? That must be incredibly hard.
It is hard. They say that, in order to understand something well enough to teach it, you need to really, really understand it. And when it comes to a topic like human consciousness, that's tricky. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a noetic scientist. I'm not a particle physicist. And so understanding these topics to the point that I could convey them through analogy, metaphor, and simple conversations that I hope are fun, I think are fun, that is tricky, but it's also exactly the kind of book I like to read. A book that I'm learning from, where I only have to read each sentence once, and I get it. So that is what I'm always trying to do.
We need to talk a bit about your hero, Robert Langdon. In the last book, he had his foundations shaken once again by what he'd learned, but there was a little bit of hope for the future. Where will readers find Robert Langdon at the beginning of this new book?
Well, any of you who have read my books know that Langdon is very fortunate in that in every thriller he meets a beautiful, intelligent woman who happens to have the exact skill set he requires. So he's very lucky that way. He's unlucky in other ways. He's a college professor who ends up in the worst situations on the planet pretty consistently. But when it comes to the female lead who's along with him, I wanted to do something different in this book. I wanted him to be not just meeting somebody, I wanted him to be very much in love. And he is. You meet him at the beginning of this book, and Langdon is in love. And the tricky thing about that is you want the relationship to be fairly established. This isn't young love, but you also don't want it to be too far down the line, because the most exciting part of any relationship is the beginning, I hear. And so, that's what they say. So in this book, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back and visit Catherine Solomon from The Lost Symbol, somebody that Langdon has had a relationship with, a platonic friendship, she's a respected colleague, but they've always circled each other in this sort of romantic way, but have never really found the time. And at the beginning of this book, at last, their stars have aligned, and the opening scene, they wake up together. And a few readers were like, wait a minute. That's right. But what's fun about this is you get to see Langdon in love. It's a different mindset for him. And also he has so much to lose. He's fighting not only for the good of a whole lot of people, but to find the woman he loves.
For those who might need a little refresher course in what noetics is, this is Catherine Solomon's area of expertise. I'm sorry to ask you to do this, but could you just give a little refresher?
I thought you were going to give it to us. I'm going to finally know what noetics is. This is great. Noetic science comes from the Greek word noetika, which means perception or consciousness, and it is the study of human consciousness. In that I'll just tell you, current consciousness theory is called local consciousness, and that means that consciousness is created locally. It's something that your brain creates. All of your hopes and fears and dreams are the product of the chemical processes in your brain. That's the current thinking. That's how it feels to us. It sort of makes sense. It's what we've all learned. But there is a lot of evidence in the field of noetics to suggest that that's not what's happening at all. And this evidence consists of what we would call anomalies, meaning things that happen that are medically documented or scientifically documented that don't really match that notion of the brain creating consciousness. And they are things like sudden savant syndrome. Some kid in Arizona gets hit in the head with a baseball, he's knocked out, he wakes up and he speaks fluent Mandarin Chinese. I don't care how hard you get hit with a baseball. A baseball cannot impart an entire language to you. Things like out-of-body experiences. We've all heard of people who have died on operating tables, been resuscitated, and they come back and they say, no, I saw the whole thing. I was sort of hovering over my body. I saw the guy with the green shirt come in with this machine, and he did this, and you said that. And the doctors are stunned. They say, your eyes were taped shut, first of all. There's no way you could have seen this. And also, there was no brain activity in your heart had stopped. So these are these anomalies that start to suggest that, wow, maybe there's something else happening here. And I sort of equate this to the moment in astronomical history when we had a model of the solar system where the Earth was at the center. We had geocentric model, and it made sense to us. We felt like we were the center of the universe. And Copernicus comes along and says, something's missing with this model. That star's in the wrong place. This planet's coming up at the wrong time. Let me put the sun at the center, and all of a sudden the model made total sense. They had a new model. And I really feel like that is the moment that we are at, historically, with the study of consciousness. And I truly believe it in the next, I'm not going to say 50 years, I'm going to say 5 years. In the next 5 years, we will start learning about science that is going to change the way we think of who we are, how we interact with each other, and really where our thoughts come. And they have enormous implications for this notion of death, what happens when we die. And I should just add that about 8 years ago, my mom passed away right as I was starting to think about writing this book. And I kept asking myself, what happens when we die? And I'll just say, I'm a skeptic, and 8 years ago, if you'd asked me, I'd say, full stop, nothing happens when you die. It's total blackness. You're a computer whose power cable has been cut. It's the end. Fast forward 8 years after countless conversations with physicists, noeticists, philosophers, reading endless accounts of near-death experiences and looking at some really mind-boggling science, I have come out the other end, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's absolutely true, with an entirely different mindset. I'm a changed person. I do not fear death in any way. I'm in no hurry. This is this is all very nice. So, but this notion of fearing death, which, by the way, is the universal fear that we all have. Every single person on the planet, no matter where you're from, what language you speak, how old you are, we are afraid of death. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that this shared fear of death is actually the catalyst for a lot of our less attractive behavior, things like nationalism and materialism and prejudice. This notion, well, I've got 87.2 years to amass everything I can amass, to leave my mark. And there really is this thinking that if we can start to understand that this life is one stop on a much longer journey, that some of that behavior starts to fall away. And I'll be very curious to see where we are in 10 years.
That just gives an indication of the ambition and the scope that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation. Thank you for sharing that, first of all, Dan. And I'm really interested by this idea of you being at one place at the beginning of the writing of the book and to have your mind changed. I know authors don't often sort of feel this way about their work, but is there any chance that you hope that the readers who read this book might also open their mind to some of these ideas?
Oh, sure. I mean, I only hope that. I have no vested interest in what any of you believes, but it's changed my life for the positive. And really, all I'm hoping is that, the first thing I'm hoping is that you have a great time reading the novel. That's my number one job, is to entertain, to make you love the process of reading. There's so many things vying for our eyeballs now. And to stop and take whatever amount of time it takes you to read a book, to sit down and that's an important thing to make sure people remember is fun. So that's my first goal. My second goal is that when you close this book, you're curious. Maybe you don't have all the answers, but you're so intrigued by the topic that you go out and you read everything you can find about consciousness, or even that you say, wait a minute, I forgot how fun reading can be, and you start reading more. That's really all I'm hoping to do.
You said as well that you think that there could be some really big changes in how people view this in 5 or 10 years' time. Catherine Solomon herself actually in the book says the future comes at us faster every day. And I wondered whether you feel that acceleration yourself and how you feel about it.
Oh, sure. I mean, without a doubt, everything's accelerating. Every tool we create, every new technology is a tool to create new technology. And so you get this hall of mirrors effect where every technology is making a new technology, and you get this exponential growth of technology. The challenge is that the human race has never created technology that we have not weaponized. Whether you're talking about fire or the wheel or the computer, we found ways to do harm with it. And so what we hope is that as our technologies increase exponentially, that our ethics, our morals, and our maturity are not linear, which, that's anybody's guess. But it's a tricky conundrum because so many people are really pessimistic about the future. And I would just say, there is reason for pessimism if you look out at the world and first of all, consume the news. We evolutionarily focus on what's bad. It keeps us alive. That's how we're built. If you're out in the field with all these beautiful things to look at, but there happens to be a lion sitting somewhere, you're focused on the lion. And the reason is you're afraid of it. It could kill you. So we are programmed to take a look at bad stuff all day. But if you really step back statistically, 99.999% of the news in the world is amazing. There's so much more love in the world than hate, so much more creativity than destruction, that these tools that we're creating, yes, they'll be used for evil because that's what we do, but far more commonly, they will be used for creativity, for communication, and for productivity.
I want to go back to Robert Langdon again. He has this ability to look at a problem or a puzzle from a very unexpected angle and see things that other people can't see. And I remember reading many years ago that this was something that you did quite literally, because you used to use inversion technique to help you with your writing process. I want to know, is this something that you still do? And if not, what do you use to kind of get over those writing blocks?
Wow. Why does this always come up? Is it that fascinating that somebody might hang upside down? You know, if you've read Angels and Demons, you might understand how that book was inspired by hanging upside down. It's interesting. There is something about that process. First, there's something physiological that you get an enormous rush of oxygen to your brain. And the other thing that happens is you are seeing the same exact landscape from an entirely new perspective. And it is a powerful tool to get your mind to look at problems in a different way. So yes, I know I should be embarrassed, but I actually think it's a pretty amazing tool. Everybody should hang upside down. That's right.
You came here for writing tips. You have your writing tip. There we go.
Right.
We spoke a little bit about how Catherine Solomon is a character returning for a previous book. She's not alone. Jonas Falkman, who is Robert Langdon's editor, also returns. I am really terrible at anagrams, puzzles, anything like that, but even I can rearrange Jonas Falkman into Jason Kaufman, who is your editor in real life.
He's been my editor a very long time.
This is a long-term relationship you have together, and it's clearly really important to you because this new book is dedicated to him. Could you give us a little bit of an insight into, I suppose, how you work together, what that relationship really means, and why it's so integral to the creation of these books?
Before I answer, I should tell you, you're going to get the honest answer because we do have a VIP in the audience tonight. Jason Kaufman.
He's here.
Stand up for a second. That's right. So it's funny. When you read the book, you'll find out that my editor, Jonas Falkman, he has a pretty tough night. That's right. And people say, you must really not like your editor. It's the exact opposite. It is... we labor in the trenches together. He's become my very best friend, trusted. What I do in these novels, I do very specifically and intentionally. Some people love what I do, some people don't. I'm hoping all of you do. But the great thing about Jason is he gets it. We share taste. And when you're a creative person, all you have to guide yourself is your taste. You write the book you want to read. And then you hope people share your taste. Jason shares my taste and has been absolutely integral to this process. You want to say something? You want to? I mean, you're here. Why don't you ask him the question? What the process? Do you want me to throw this to you?
This is great, because we have mobile mics here, so you can't escape, Jason.
Right.
I'm going to leave the stage in a rare moment of theatricality.
That's right. Sorry, yeah, I'm going to pay for this. That's
Jason,
right.
can you give us a little bit of an insight into what it is to work with Dan Brown and bringing these books together?
Thank you for putting me on the spot.
That's right. This is right out of chapter 2, just so you know.
This is like the first Langdon lecture.
It is, actually.
Well, you can tell just by listening to Dan, he's enormously inquisitive. There's nothing that doesn't intrigue him. And as Dan has an idea for a book and it starts coming together, he begins by ordering 30 nonfiction books that he reads and peppers me with ideas and ideas and ideas. And then, he has a very clear idea of where things are going to go. And we do have, I think, very similar taste, going all the way back to Angels and Demons. And, we sort of know where we want Langdon to go. And Dan's instincts are always right on. And then we just talk a lot about the lines, the scenes, the plot ideas, plot twists, and it's a great honor. As I said, we had a dinner last night. I said it's amazing to love your job, and it's amazing to have a best friend. And when the two things combine, and your job that you love is working with your best friend, it's pretty remarkable.
Thank you, Jonas. Wow.
Wow.
Wow. Hey. Wow. He always has a way to make me misty.
Turns out jumping off a stage is really easy. Getting back on it is a little bit harder. Anyway, I've made it. What's really interesting as well in this book is that it, as well as putting poor Jason through his paces in a sort of action hero style, there's also something about the actual process of writing in this book. And again, we're not going to have any spoilers here, but one of the intrigues is about a soon-to-be published manuscript. And we live in a world where piracy and hacking and AI are part of our daily conversations. And it meant that that part of the book, for me as a reader, was genuinely thrilling and dangerous. And I just wondered whether for you as a writer, working, I believe, digitally first time with the editing on this book, whether there was ever a moment when you were nervous or even nauseous about having that kind of plot line running for a book.
Sure. And Jason and I exchange pages almost daily, as we really get into the writing. And we have a very specific, very secure system to do it. I won't really outline it here. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But it is pretty involved, and we managed for 7 years to avoid any kind of leaks. And we translated the book into a whole lot of languages without any leaks. So it's been we've been very careful and I think also very lucky.
I think as well I've heard you talking about when you're sort of gathering ideas for books, because people often want to know where the inspiration comes from. But you've been writing now for a long time, and I get the impression that you're gathering ideas all the time. It's just a question of how do they fit together into the plot for the next book. How do you know when you have enough material to sort of really sit down and start writing the plot of a book?
Yeah, well, there's a point at which research becomes procrastination. And I'm being very serious, especially if part of your research is, well, maybe go to Prague again. I mean, I've got a scene at the Four Seasons. Maybe just stay there for a month, sort of soak up the Four Seasons. There really is a point when you know enough, and it's time to write. And I'm really strict about that. And it's funny. I remember one of these books. Langdon was in a restaurant. This was a couple books ago, and I decided I was writing a chapter. I wanted to have him eating whatever really was in the restaurant's menu. And I ended up emailing with the chef back and forth. I thought, you know what? You are now officially procrastinating. That's right. So now I just say, Langdon has, I just put in X's and mark them as big red X's and know that I'm going to come back and get that information at a later time. I think the real trick is to know that you have, for every one thing you want to include in the novel, you need 10. Okay. And so much falls on the floor when I write these books. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that for every 10 words that end up in the book, I wrote 100. And that's just the only way I can do it. I don't get it right the first time. And part of that is respecting the reader's time and challenging myself to make sure that on every page and every paragraph, there's something that's exciting, something that's enlightening. And when I say enlightening, I mean enlightening to me. And then I just hope that it's enlightening to other people.
And you just mentioned there about discipline, the discipline of writing. Everybody has a different approach. Some people write in the morning, some people write in the evening, some people need coffee, some people stay well away from coffee. What is your process? What does a writing day look like for Dan Brown?
I start every day at 4 a.m., and that's 7 days a week. I find that if I don't write every day, if I go through 2 sleep cycles, things start to evaporate. I have an enormous system of trying to keep track of data and ideas. It's funny, I was talking the other day to a friend saying, when I wrote Da Vinci Code, I could take a long walk and hold all the pieces in my head and move them around and come back and have lunch and eventually take some notes. And now I go out, I walk my dog, and I think, okay, so what's my character's name? And so I find I have to write down absolutely everything. And my office, especially as Jason and I get going with plotting in earnest, it's like one of those whiteboards with the yarn, the stickers, and all of the notes that are all interconnected. And that's the way that I keep it together.
And we've touched on a few things this evening, which are the ways in which you are able to ratchet up the tension, that compressed time frame, and almost everyman character who's thrown into extraordinary circumstances. This is a really tough question, but we spoke a little bit about the clear success of these books, given how many copies you sell on a regular basis. If I asked you, what is your secret for creating a thriller that really works? what would the answer be?
Wow. I would quote Winston Churchill and dodge the question by saying this. Success is moving from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm.
It's a good, honest answer.
Well, I figured I'd quote your countryman.
We've had some questions coming in from people who are watching online, and we have some question cards also from the audience here. I'm going to turn to a few of these now. One person, Richard, has asked whether you have a team to assist you with the creation of some of these puzzles and codexes and things like that, or is it all your own work?
Well, aside from my editor, Jason, no, it's all my own work. And I grew up in a house that had no television. My parents did not want to have TV. And for fun, I don't know how fun it was, but we learned to play music. We read a lot of books, and we did puzzles and codes. My dad was a mathematician, or he's a math teacher and a mathematician. He is now 89 and still razor sharp and still has a math newsletter that he sends out to his following every week. I grew up in a house where on Christmas morning, we didn't have, you come down, there are no presents. There's a code on the Christmas tree. And you got to break the code, and it sends you maybe to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, you find another clue. And you go from clue to clue all across the house, and you finally find your presents. So for me, codes, puzzles, treasure hunts, they were a blast, always. That's how I associate. So when I decided I'm going to write books, just instinctually, I said, well, it's a treasure hunt.
This leads beautifully into the next question, which comes from Kriti in Tucson. She says, considering your love of symbols, puzzles, and secret codes, have you ever tried an escape room?
Oh. All right.
If so, how long did it take you to crack it?
So my fiancée is Dutch. She's here tonight, and she can corroborate this story. We were going through the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam. And unbeknownst to me, they had a Dan Brown escape room in the airport. It was a promotion for my previous book. And she said, you got to go try it. I said, no way. What if I can't get out? That is a headline nobody needs. That's right. And I never did it. I'm afraid of escape rooms. I don't know why.
Can you imagine waking up and seeing that headline in a newspaper?
I was trapped in there all night. I just couldn't figure it out.
Oh my. We've spoken a little bit about the time that it takes to write a novel, any novel, but particularly this one. And Jada, who's in Philadelphia, has asked, what keeps you inspired?
The answer is simple, learning. Like so many of you, I love learning new things. I grew up on the campus of Phillips Exeter Academy, a prep school where all of the adults were teachers. All of my babysitters were students who were at the school to learn. And I'm one of those strange kids where learning was cool. I didn't find out till later that it wasn't that cool. I learned that very quickly. But writing these books is an excuse to learn. Realistically, the amount of work in the field of consciousness that I had to do, I never would have done if I hadn't gotten into this book and thought, if I don't learn this, I'm not going to finish this. And I'll tell you, there was a time, maybe 4 years in, when I went for a walk on the beach and thought, okay, so what if I just call Penguin Random House and say, hey, let me send you some money back. That's right. This isn't going to happen. And that thought was so painful to me. I couldn't even fathom failing at this project. It meant so much to me. And I just found the strength to continue to learn. And because the science also drives the plot, the more you learn, the more you know how to write the book.
And again, is that sort of driven by the idea that you feel that the ideas contained within the book are potentially so positive for anybody reading it that it was worth pushing through to get the book to readers?
Sure. I mean, in this case, yes, absolutely. In sort of more general terms, it's not whether the information is positive or negative. Some of the information in the book is pretty shocking in a negative way, but overall, I think this is a very optimistic book, and I do think that I've heard from some people who finished it who say, I look at death differently. I look at where my thoughts come from differently. I feel different. And certainly, I've come out the other side changed without a doubt. I had the luxury or the curse of living with this for 8 years. So for me, it was a fairly intense experience. Langdon makes a similar journey. He starts this book where I was. Catherine Solomon will tell him about an experiment in precognition, which I outline in the book, which when I read it, I said, that's impossible, absolutely impossible. And of course, when she presents it in the book, Langdon says, that's impossible. So as you read the book and you come from a skeptical point of view, you have a character who's always right there by your side. Every time you say, that's impossible, Langdon will be like, wait, that's impossible. So you can just relax and know that you have a skeptic who's going along with you, and when he's convinced, you're allowed to be convinced.
And we have another question from Philadelphia, this time from Andrew, who was asking if there are any moments that stand out to you from the writing process of this book that was any different from the previous books in the series.
Entering year 7. This book was deeply emotional to me, partly because of my mother's death, and because what I was learning was very, very relevant to my thoughts about her. But I should stress, I did not have an out-of-body experience. I did not have some divine revelation. The ideas that have really settled in me as feeling my feeling of reality come from science, come from understanding and processing these scientific experiments, which are all in the book, that really, to me, confirm that life is not as we imagine it. Their brains work in a much different way. And coincidentally, that happens to have incredible positive ramifications for all sorts of things.
A very, very important question as well from readers online. This is from Rachel in Brooklyn, who wants to know whether there will be more Robert Langdon books in the future.
Well, my agent is here.
Okay.
Without a doubt, there will be more Robert Langdon books. That's right. I could give you no other answer, but it is, I think that's a fairly accurate
There's
answer.
a very approving nod there from your agent.
That's right.
It's very, very important.
By the way, for those of you who might know my agent, Heidi Lang, when you read this book, you will find out that the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic is Heidi Nagel, which may or may not be an anagram of Lang, and may or may not mean nail in German. There you have it.
Draw from that what conclusions you will.
That's right.
Before we go to questions that have been submitted from the audience here, I was just thinking about, again, the sort of techniques that you employ to ratchet that tension up. And we were talking about how Langdon has discovered love in this book with somebody that he has a relationship with. And I wondered whether, whilst he is always acting in the interests of, I guess, of all of us, and it's really important to him and the human race, whether there's something about the personal, when you are doing something in order to, because you're in love with somebody, whether that adds any extra fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. I'm hoping for everyone here that they've been in love, and you know what that feeling is, to say, the world wouldn't make sense to me without this person in it. That becomes an incredibly powerful motivator for an individual. And because it's something that we can all identify with, we identify with the character.
Great. We're moving now to some questions from the audience. You've mentioned this character, shall we say, this person, we'll see in a moment. Winston is an integral part of your writing process. I enjoy your camaraderie. What does Winston think of this book, and how is he dealing with you now going to be on the road after 8 years? Hugs to Winston.
Right. Okay. For those of you who don't know who Winston is, yes, Winston was the villain in Origin, was an AI character. But Winston is my yellow lab, a faithful companion. And the only reason I have any followers on social media is because I post pictures of Winston. You know, when you're an author, and you work for 8 years, you don't have much to say. It's like, well, I typed for a while today. Here's my dog, and so it's funny when I got this puppy and named him Winston after the character in the novel. Somebody said, like, you do know that character comes back and kills his master, right? I was like, bad dog. But Winston so far has been very well behaved. He is under my feet every day when I'm writing, and he is, in fact, just yesterday as we left New Hampshire, he came down very, very excited to see the suitcases, and with that look like, where are we going? It's like, sorry, buddy. But I'll see him tomorrow. And then, of course, I'm going off on Heidi, you can tell, 12, 13 country book tour very soon. And Winston cannot come. It's very sad. But we have a house sitter who brings dogs over to play with him, and he'll be fine.
As well as having Winston at your feet when you're writing, are you the kind of author who gets benefit from the daily walk that is obviously required for a dog, where walking and having that time can be quite a useful thinking time for you and the plotting of things? Yeah,
and in fact, it's funny. There's a whole lot of science that suggests that repetitive motion is very, very helpful to the cognitive process. It sounds crazy, but yes, I have a lot of ideas walking, and I carry a dictaphone, and I often thought, if I ever lost this dictaphone and somebody found it, they'd call the police, because it's somebody. First of all, I'm walking fast and I'm panting, so I sound a little crazy. And I'm saying things like, okay, we're going to kill him in the Fountain of the Four Rivers, and then we're going to burn the cardinal alive. And yeah. But actually, there was a famous mathematician, so famous that I can't remember his name, but who solved a very big, long mathematical problem by digging a ditch in his backyard. He dug it and filled it in, dug it and filled it in over and over and over until he finally figured out what it was. So if you're struggling with something in life, take a walk.
Writing tip number 2. There we go.
That's right. After you're hanging upside down.
Yeah.
That's right.
This next question comes from Lauren. Where's Lauren? Hey, hi, Lauren. Sorry, I didn't mean to sort of pull you up, but you put your name here, and I thought, well, let's say hi to Lauren. Lauren wants to know which of your books was the most challenging to write and why. She also says in brackets, you rock. So.
Well, thank you. The most challenging book to write had always been The Lost Symbol until I wrote The Secret of Secrets. This has been by far the most challenging. The topic, it's just one of those things that it was just a difficult topic to learn enough that I could really write a thriller about it. I'm so happy I stuck with it. I don't think there was really any question of that. But I would say this by a long shot. It's certainly the longest I've worked on a book, and it's the longest book I've written. It has the most characters. It's the most intricately plotted. And I also hope it's the one that you enjoy most, because it's the one I enjoyed writing the most.
You mentioned earlier as well that for every 10 words you wrote, you had written 100. Were there ever moments where you could sort of see the construction of your book and thought, I have to start again? Like, have you ever had that thing where you've had to junk something completely and start from scratch? Or is it always about just fixing the smaller things?
No, it's about fixing the smaller things. And by smaller things, I mean, Jason, I'm thinking of Swedenborg. There was a character in this novel for 3 or 4 years who had his own thread, a guy named Swedenborg. And there was a time that Jason and I had this conversation saying, like, Swedenborg's just not cutting it. It's like, he doesn't need to be there. And if you take him out, the house of cards fall over, but you got to take him out. And so we figured out a way to take this character out, restructure, and the book is much better for it. I've never had to go back to the beginning, but yeah, we've made major changes along the way, and that's part of it. When you write thrillers, you would better know where you're going to land. I sort of equate it to building a house. You build a foundation, and that can't change. But as the house goes up, you may move interior walls or change the color of something. It's funny. There was a quote by a very famous novelist who said, thriller writers who start a novel without knowing where it ends are just liars. And I've never forgotten that.
We have another question here, which is, you seem to be able to anticipate world events. Do you have some kind of informant or spy?
Not as far as you know.
I tell you, we were talking earlier about writing about something like noetic science and the pace at which that's changing. Do you ever feel the pressure as a writer, like, if I don't get this out fast enough, it will have changed, like it'll already be out there?
Absolutely, especially in a field like consciousness research that's changing every day. And some of these experiments are starting to percolate and starting to rise up and be available for all of our consumption. And this book took a long time to publish also. There's an army of fact checkers that go through these books, and then we translate them, and the translators become fact checkers also because they're reading incredibly carefully and question everything. And so there's a process after you finish it that might take 6 months to a year. And you just keep watching the news going, please, don't find out about this yet. Please, 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 let me be the one to break this news. So yeah, you're always feeling the pressure.
And when you're thinking about the ideas. We've touched on just a few of them. I have to say there are so many more sort of topics and ideas and themes in this book, but you're putting them all into a location. And we've had a few questions come in this evening, which are basically which comes first. Do you have the idea that you want to write about first, or is it the location that helps you sort of locate those things?
It's the idea, without a doubt, and I choose the location. Ideally, the location is so closely tied to the idea that you could not possibly set the book anywhere else. For example, The Lost Symbol was set in Washington, D.C., among the world of Freemasonry and the history of D.C., and that could only be set in Washington, D.C. We have another VIP here tonight. I won't call you up. We have a very, very prominent Mason in our audience tonight. But as far as location, it's got to be absolutely tied to the story.
And with somewhere like Prague, we sort of touched on some of the things that you can find in that city. Was there a moment when you discovered anything there where you were just like, oh, that absolutely solves that problem for me, or helps take me into a completely new and exciting area?
Without a doubt. I mean, the research and the location drives the plot often. And I might, there's a location in this novel called the Dripstone Wall. It's this fascinating Mannerist sculpture in Prague. It's a giant wall that looks sort of like it's melting rock against the back of a monastery. And I just thought, this is the strangest creation. And it's got a little door in it, and you don't know where the door goes. And I just said, how do I get my character there to experience this location? There's a number of fascinating locations. I don't want to give any away, but there is a scale model of the Eiffel Tower that Langdon may or may not have to climb.
Mike in the audience here has actually asked for a percentage breakdown of the time that you spend researching the topic against the sort of the locations and the sites. Is there a sort of balance there, and how even is that balance?
Certainly more time writing, but while you're writing, you're also researching simultaneously. At the beginning of the project, it's almost entirely research. You're trying to figure out what's interesting here, what can I share, and then you're really trying to figure out how do I build the scaffolding on which to hang all of this information in such a way that you are just having fun, but you don't realize how much is flowing in as far as factual information. So I'd say it's almost 100% research in the I'd say the first quarter, and then maybe the middle 50% might be 50-50, and then the end it's all writing. And when I say writing, I really mean editing. And I'm not just saying that because Jason's here. That is the truth. Writing is really rewriting, and that is it's great. There was a wonderful quote from a writer who said that the only difference between good writers and bad writers is that good writers know when they're bad. And that is the process of rewriting. Understanding that you're not going to get it right the first time. I certainly don't. I don't know too many writers who do. And the writers who are on the walls here who've been published are usually those writers who can read what they wrote yesterday and say, oh, actually, 20% of this is pretty good.
Do you have to, I mean, you can't be precious, I suppose, about the things that you've written, but is it ever difficult to let things go? You've spoken about, that high attrition rate with the writing. Have you ever come to blows with Jason about sort of wanting to keep hold of something?
I don't think we've never fought about a single thing. We've gone and maybe had a martini and drowned our sorrows in the fact that Swedenborg's dead. But yes, it's hard to let it go because it represents work. But it's exciting to let it go because you've let it go such that the book is working better, and you realize by letting it go, you're closer to the end, and that it's really like studying art. And they talk about negative space. It's about leaving the space for the solid mass to exist, and the same in music. You just have to leave the space such that what you want people to hear or see or experience has the space to breathe.
And I suppose at the same time as you're having to recognize that there's some work to be done, how do you know when the work is finished? How do you know when you're like, time to press print?
Well, the coy answer is the quote that novels are never completed, they're simply abandoned. And there's some truth to that, but I just know. And when I say it's done, it's done in my opinion. And then Jason will read it, and he'll say, hey, we can lose this, this, and this, but you might want to flesh this out. And then you hand it off to your publisher, and they say, hey, love this. This one chapter might have been too long. And then you hand it to the translators, and everybody has just a little bit of an opinion, but realistically, the manuscript that Jason and I complete, when we say it's done, it's just funny, and there's a point at which you're no longer fixing something. It's sort of like a painting. You know when it's done, and you stop working on it for fear of ruining it. You also become so close to the book that you realize I no longer have perspective. I need other people to read this. Because when you read it in one sitting. You read it for the first time, and I've read it thousands and thousands of times, literally. And I know whatever the next word is. It's hard for my brain to be able to mimic the experience you're going to have, which is really my job to say, what experience is the reader going to have? How do I make that as exciting as possible?
You did confirm earlier that there will be more Robert Langdon books, but we have a slightly more specific question from Chris, which is to ask if there's any chance that Langdon might go to Asia in the future.
There's always a chance. I really thought the book After the Lost Symbol would be set in India, and I spent a lot of time in India studying the philosophies there, and realized that it was so difficult for me to really get my arms around it because I wasn't brought up in that culture. It almost felt disrespectful. I felt like I'm not ready to write a book set in this world. That's not to say I won't ever do it. I'd like to do it. I just don't think I'm ready to do it yet. But all it would take is just moving there for a bit of time and making some really smart friends who can tell me what to write about. That's right. That's right.
And there's another question here, which I know you've spoken about a bit in the past, and actually through this evening's conversation, you've shared a little bit about the journey that you've been on as a writer with these books. But the question is to ask whether you would consider yourself to be heavily religious, considering the subjects that you do write about, and if not, what has encouraged you to write about those subjects. I guess if we go right back to the beginning with Angels and Demons, and then what you're writing about today, that is a huge journey you've been on. Does that sort of feed into that idea of you wanting to learn more and more about the world?
Sure. I mean, I can say I'm a student of religion. I'm as confused as the rest of us. And these books are really just a way for me to work out a lot of these questions. And I grew up in a very religious household. My mom was the church organist, and I learned music by turning pages for her. So I heard a lot of church services. I grew up as a religious kid. And when I was about 13, I went to the Boston Museum of Science and learned about this thing called evolution. But I'd so far only heard about Adam and Eve. And I went to my priest and said, which story is true? And this guy said that nice boys don't ask that question. And I immediately started asking the question. I've been asking ever since. But I moved very quickly into the foundations of science. I grew up in an interesting household where my dad was essentially a mathematician and a math textbook author. And my mom was very, very religious, and somehow it all worked. But I moved into science, and the deeper I went into science, I studied a lot of physics, a lot of mathematics. I went through university. The deeper you get, and I'm sure some of you had this experience, numbers become imaginary numbers. There's uncertainty principles. There's margins for error, and it starts getting very soft. And some of the questions that are being asked now in the realm of quantum mechanics and quantum physics almost sound philosophical and spiritual. And you realize, as my mother would say, that science and religion are really just two different languages attempting to tell the same story. And religion, when you read it metaphorically, which I think is how it is intended, actually has a lot in common with consciousness theory. I think the challenge with religion comes when we read these metaphors literally, and you tell a child, no, there really is. There was this guy named Adam and somebody named Eve, and this is how it all happened. And then you go and take biology, and you end up scratching your head saying, wait a minute, that's not really how it's intended. And so it's been this interesting journey for Langdon and for me along the way to start out kind of angry about these two philosophies that wouldn't match, and coming so far to realize, oh, wait a minute. From a certain perspective, they very much match, and they are trying to answer the same questions.
And going back even further, before Angels and Demons, I know that music plays a really important part in your life as well. Obviously a completely different form of expression, but still very, very creative. Do you find that all of these things work together in helping you, I suppose, to do what you're mainly doing, as you said at the beginning, which is you're a storyteller. You are here to entertain and to give people that story.
Well, good music tells a story. And I took a whole lot of music composition, orchestration, and I also studied prose and studied just storytelling and fiction. And what I came to understand in doing both is that they are incredibly similar. You cannot write a symphony and you cannot write a novel if you don't understand and respect structure. You absolutely have to understand structure. You have to understand dynamic. You cannot write 3 car chases in a row any more than you can write 3 triple forte sections of tutti in a row. You need the silence. You need the quiet. You have to understand the notion of thematic material. The idea that in music, there are themes that rise and fall at just the right moment. You've kind of forgotten them, and there they are again. The same thing happens with novels. If you've done a good job, you've got themes that rise and fall. They're very, very similar processes. And every day when I'm done writing, I stop at the piano on my way back to the real world, and I play piano for a while. I find that it really is a great bridge back to the rest of life, which is the real life.
We have reached that stage where I'm getting looks, which means we're running out of time, but we have really, honestly, just barely scratched the surface of what this book contains. Dan, thank you so much for such a brilliant conversation. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.